Welcome back, my friends. We are reading through the whole Bible from Genesis to Revelation in 2023. Today is day 2, and we are in Genesis chapters 5 through 10. Following this reading schedule, information is in the description. If you want to join us, it's definitely not too late to start the journey at this time. We love to have you along. If you're watching this, leave me a comment. What is it that in your reading today of these 5 chapters, what is it that kind of came out to you? What are you thinking about? What are you wrestling with as you engage here with us? Now, probably there's 2 things that you, if anything, there's probably 2 things that you're kind of confused about, that you're thinking, I don't understand this at all. And I'm not going to actually get a lot into those things. I'm guessing they are the beginning of chapter 6, the sons of God and the daughters of men or humans, and then the Nephilim in verse 4. What are those? There's a lot of different ideas about that, and very few actually come to the same exact conclusion. There's no firm consensus. If you want to learn more about that, I can point you in some directions to continue to do that. But if I kind of talked about all that, would take up all of our time today, so I'm not going to do that. And then the other thing is towards the end of chapter 9, after Noah's Ark and all that, and the flood is over, Noah plants this vineyard. He drinks too much. He's laying in a tent. One of his sons comes in, and something happens. And if you're like me, it's not exactly clear what happened, why it was so bad, etc. Again, not really just an easy answer to that. Some different speculations and possibilities that could be going on there. But significant in the biblical story that this particular son, Ham, has a son named Canaan, and he is the kind of forebear of the people who are in the land, who are not moral, not following God, that eventually will be kicked out of the land, the promised land, so that God's people can inhabit it. So one of the things, not the main thing, I don't think, or the only thing certainly, that's happening here is that in this Genesis, in this book of beginnings, it's helping the people who originally received it in their community to understand some of the origins, not only of the world that we live in, but also of the different people groups that were around them. And so this is a story that is giving some context to these people that they experienced many, many, many years later, the Canaanites. So there's a couple things that, again, we're going to have to decide. You're going to have to decide as you're reading through the Bible. Big picture, 5 chapters today. That's a lot, although I think it went pretty well myself quickly when I read it and listened to it both. We're going to have to either decide to chase down rabbit trails or to stay kind of in the big picture. And so that's a wrestling thing. And I think given what we're doing, the pace that we're moving at, it's going to be tough to chase the rabbit trails, to explore these things that are interesting and worth looking into, but maybe not going to be in the big thrust of the story as the main thing. So here's what I kind of want to do with that, and what I want to invite you to is that if there's something that's showing up day after day, week after week in the reading, and you're like, I don't understand this, and it's happening again and again and again and again and again, those are the things, okay, we need to pause and take a look at them because it's coming up again and again and we're not understanding. If it's something that occurs in one place, it's still worth looking at, but we're not going to give it that much time in this fast pace, right? Move through the whole Bible. So that's the deal. All right, Stephanie and Ethan, I will interact, probably not for chit chat, but for engagement on what we're talking about. So if you have something you want to add to the discussion, if you have a question about what we're on, absolutely. I would love to talk with you about that in the midst of this. If anybody who's watching this, as a matter of fact, and I'm glad that this moment gives me the chance to give this invitation. If you would like to come on and talk with me on any given day, if you're in this journey together, I'm going to try to many afternoons around this time do these videos, not necessarily every day. Like I said, I'm not going to rearrange my whole schedule if I have something else going on to be here at this particular time. But if you would like to join me on the video and discuss it too, I would love that any given time. And as a matter of fact, even in the moment, if you said, hey, I really want to come on with you and chat about this, I can send you a link, and it should just take a minute for you to get in. So that was a long answer to a very short question. So I'll be happy to interact with this here. So in the essence of time, I don't know how long these are going to be. I would love to have them be really short, but I'm just too long-winded for that. So even skipping over right a lot, I'm not going to walk through 5 chapters verse by verse in a particularly meaningful way. I want to each time we do this to highlight some particular things. Sometimes it'll just be because they're interesting to me or that I'm wrestling with or learning about. But oftentimes too, because I think they're big picture things that if we miss, we're going to miss the big story. If we miss the big story, we're in trouble. That's not good. We want to, in this broad reading thing, kind of capture in on this. So let me pick up with a few things for today that I think are really interesting or important in this thing. So if we start at the very beginning of chapter 5, where our reading began, it's interesting that it's repeated when God created mankind, humanity, right? He made them in the likeness of God, right? This is reiteration, reaffirmation, this core idea that we talked about yesterday. He created them male and female and blessed them. And he named them mankind when they were created. Okay. So this is, again, foundational. It's repeated here again. This is something that we can't lose as we move on. God's purpose in creating us in his image and the responsibility that he wants for us to have does not go away. It's going to continue to come back because it's really, really important. So we looked a little bit yesterday, or we read about at least Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, but there's another son who's now going to be introduced to the story, Seth. And his family line is going to be important, right, to our big picture here of the story. So Seth is in Adam's likeness or image, which is really interesting continuation on. All right, so flip over to chapter 6. This really sets the stage for what's happening in Noah's story. And it's really, really important. So I'm going to focus less on the details of the building of the ark, less on the details of the flood itself and the time that elapsed and those kind of things. Again, very important, but we got to choose some things and not others in the essence of time in this particular case. And Stephanie, you asked me if we were interacting, and now you're not interacting with me. So come on, what do you have to share here with us today? Again, feel free, anyone to do that. So things are getting not so good, right? Things have been not so good since Genesis chapter 3 and sin enters the world. But look at chapter 6, verse 5. It's painting a picture here for us. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Right? Sad stuff. Verse 6, the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race that I have created. Right? This is the opposite thing of God's creation intention. It has happened. Yes, absolutely. We will talk about that in just a sec. Yeah, this is a restart through one man and his family. Right, everything is messed up. I mean, that picture that I just read there, kind of highlight that, underline that. That's the that's the big picture of painting of how bad things have gotten. As a matter of fact, if you look down to verse 11 in chapter 6, and then we'll talk about Noah for a second. Verse 11, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. Violence is one of the things that's is at root. It's not the only thing, right? But it's a huge thing that is breaking God's heart, right? He's deeply troubled at this violence, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. And so God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence. So now this idea should be tracking us back to the beginning, to the creation mandate given to Adam and Eve. Fill the world, right? And multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, have responsibility over it. So instead of the earth being filled with the goodness of God's creation and living under his reign and rule in the world, representing him to everything and everybody, instead of filling the earth with goodness, what people have done is filled the earth with violence. And God's not having it. Why did God create them if he knew he would have to destroy them? Yeah, I mean, here's a question, Ethan. We can ask questions that the narrative doesn't give the answer to. We can spend a lot of time doing that. Those questions pop into our minds very quickly and easily, right? But I think the idea here is for us to track with the story that is that's being told. But those questions will continue to come back up, won't they, in the biblical story and for the biblical authors, particularly when we get to things like Job and Ecclesiastes and those kind of things. But for me, at least part of the answer is that God has not given up on his plan, and that's the thing. The Genesis 1 and 2 creation intent, God will have that in the end, and this is not it. But the idea of, right, God having a people in a place with his presence, doing his will, God will have that. So it's not like a reversal back and saying, forget it, we're not going to do a creation thing, we're not going to do an earth thing, we're not going to do a human thing, we're just going to say, scratch that. No, God's not giving up on that. But he will have not just people doing whatever they want, but people, again, doing what he wants. And so that's, I think, sets us up for the big picture of the whole biblical storyline. How's God going to go about that in the midst of everything? And of course, questions about God's foreknowledge and how that affects things are interesting questions as well in the midst of the story. Yeah, his desire never changes. What he wants, he continues to want, and he will continue to pursue. And we see it slowly and steadily, sometimes one step forward and two steps back as we track through the story. We'll kind of see how that works. But speaking of, what God's looking for, let's look at Noah for a second. So this is interesting. So verse 8, in the midst of this whole description of how messed up everything is, people are only thinking about doing evil all the time, but there's one guy. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, right? He stands out in contrast to the rest in this case. And so this is a big part of his story. So verse 9 tells us a little bit more. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. Now, I don't know if that means just because they're so bad, he's like just okay, but he stands out. But the idea of Noah, right, is it's a positive picture. And by the way, we'll come back to this, but the idea of being blameless does not mean that he never sinned or never falls short of what God wants, but that I'm gonna put a pause on that because we'll keep coming back to it. But there's something about this idea of being blameless among the people of time, and he walked faithfully with God. Okay, so this is interesting in the big picture of the story. We sort of talk about, okay, creation, sin, now we're separated from God. Well, Noah, there's problems because Noah's going to die like everybody else without access to the tree of life. Noah doesn't have a certain degree of God's presence in the garden, again, what we lost. But there's not a lot at this point bad that's said about Noah, right? He's a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. So what God expected from Noah seemed to be that person of faith, and we see that even after the flood. So let's jump way forward to that. And I know there's a lot here. We could spend an hour here talking about it. I don't think you guys want to spend an hour, although maybe you do. It's interesting of the idea of the flood as kind of several scholars and people have pointed this out. The flood is kind of decreation. That on days, I think, 2 and 3 of creation in Genesis chapter 1, right? The vault, the skies and the waters, and then the seas and the dry land, the kind of over the chaos and the waters of the deep. God creates, he puts things in their place, kind of holds back the waters and the chaos to create a good place for us to live. And it's almost like in the flood, it kind of like lets go of that sustaining work of holding back, right, the waters and the chaos, and allows it to come in and to wipe out or to cleanse the wickedness and the evil and the violence of the world. So yeah, I don't know exactly what that relationship looked like, but it's good. Is every indication that we have, right, in the text. And yeah, Noah stands out. He's the only one that's described. Not much is said about I don't think the righteousness or unrighteousness of his kids before the flood, but that certainly comes into play afterwards. So look in chapter 8 and verse 20. When the flood is over, they're coming out of the ark. And look what Noah does. Chapter 8, verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. Right. So at this point, there's no indication that I've seen of a mandate for sacrifices, no particular sacrificial system instituted that was a particular demand. But I think, I'm speculating here a little bit, but you can tell me what you think. I think, Noah in his righteousness and his thankfulness to God for his preservation is bringing this offering. And as we'll see when we get into Exodus and Leviticus before too long, there's different kinds of offerings for different reasons. And it gets a little bit deeper than we sometimes think of offerings and sacrifices. But I think just Noah, out of his heart of thankfulness and righteousness towards God, offers this burnt offering for to worship God for his provision and thankfulness, right? And look at God's response again into this relationship that, if you will, that Noah has with the Lord. Verse 21, the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, right, of the of Noah's sacrifice and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done." So this is the first thing that's stated as a covenant, and that's the last thing we'll spend some time talking about. So interesting here, right? That God says, even though, right, He knows we're still going to sin. This fresh start isn't going to be all perfect, right? It's actually going to go bad again before too long in a lot of ways. But God has said in this covenant promise. So covenant is a concept, is a word that's going to come up again and again and again. And if you don't understand covenant, you won't understand the biblical story. So take note of it when we have this language of covenant throughout the Bible. So chapter 9, and this speaks into a comment that was made earlier, I think by Stephanie, about a new start, a fresh start, right? Again, the language, watch the language repetition happen from different places. Chapter 9, then God blessed Noah and said, and his sons, and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." Right? That's the creation mandate given to the first man and woman to be fruitful, multiply, increase in number, fill the earth. We just saw that instead of that, the earth was filled with violence as people multiplied. But now this fresh start, this renewed mandate is given once again, which I think speaks to kind of this point that God does not give up on God's purpose for us. Some interesting things happen here that are now different. I remember in the beginning, or maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't, was kind of a vegetarian situation that God said, "I give you all the plants to eat." Now he says in verse 3 of chapter 9, now you get to eat meat. Meat eaters, barbecue lovers, rejoice. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or not. And as well as given the injunction that those who take the life need to have the consequence themselves. You see that, right? Verse 6, whoever sheds human blood, by humans their blood shall be shed. For in the image of God, there it is again, in the image of God, God has made mankind. So we do not have the prerogative to take it upon ourselves to kill others. Like that violence, again, violence is the stated reason, top reason for the flood. So we got to think about that a lot in our lives and in our world today as well. As for you, verse 7, again, repetition. We saw this in Genesis 1. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it. And then in the following section, this is the last thing, we have this word covenant. I counted 7 times in this chapter. Covenant, 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 covenant. There may be more than that, but I counted at least 7. Verse 9. Chapter 9, verse 9. I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, and all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature. I establish my covenant with you. And here's the deal of the covenant, the promise. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And this will be a sign for you. We know what this is probably already, right? The rainbow. So one of the things that's interesting about this covenant in comparison to some of the other covenants is that it's sort of one-sided. Most of the covenant relationships have God makes a promise and there's a responsibility for people. I think you could say I mean, God gave a mandate, restated the mandate to Abraham to multiply and fill the earth. But this is mostly an unconditional covenant that God makes, a promise that he says that I'm not going to do this restart, wipe out thing again. This is now going to be a steady environment, which he's now going to work first through Noah, through his descendants. And we're going to get quickly tomorrow to Abraham. That's where the story continues. So big picture stuff. What questions do you have? What thoughts do you have as we wrap this up for today? Kind of pause to yourself as you're doing these readings and think about, can I tell the story? Can I close my Bible? And this is gonna get harder to do as we get more and more along here. But can I tell the story of what's going on here so far in the big picture? We should be seeking to be able to do that as we want to kind of walk people into the story here. So God is at work. We see his these creation things repeated, made in the image of God. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, right? Not with violence, but with righteousness, with people seeking to please God. As we look at this big picture of what do we do with death now in the world instead of life, exile from the intimacy of God's presence, and yet we still see God at work. How's that going to continue on? And how's God going to work with the people who have failed so far miserably? What's going to happen through these particular people that God's going to work through, starting with Noah and his family. Chapter 10, the last chapter of our reading, kind of tracks the family line that's going to move us forward. So all these links are telling us the story. Here's where we came from, everybody. Here's where the particular people who God's going to work through. And I'm excited about tomorrow. Come back for that. But I'm going to wrap up for today. Leave any thoughts or questions you have, any observations that you've made from the reading. And I hope to see you again soon. Bye.